Hey there, welcome back. We got an exciting build-up for you today. This is going to be the first in a 2 or 3 part series that will take you through step-by-step in building up a performance-oriented GM6L80E. So the application here is going to be a 2010 GMC Sierra. It's got a 6.2 liter engine. It's going to be making somewhere between 600 and 650 horsepower. It'll be driven mostly on the street. It may or may not see the track, but for the most part, it's going to be a fun vehicle and will occasionally be used in light to moderate towing. So the heart and soul of this kit is a Circle D Performance Transmissions Level 2 kit. And that kit comes with pretty much everything you need as far as building up the case and the hydraulics of the transmission. And so we're going to be pairing that with a brand new GM OEM Techum internal mode switch and harness assembly. And we're basically going through this transmission soup to nuts and beefing it up to handle that kind of power. So let's get a little bit closer to the bench and we'll kind of walk through all the parts and components. I'll give some advice and guidance on build strategy and tips and pointers, etc. And then we'll begin the assembly process. Alright, first things first, we have our bolts and small parts. The pass-through connector sleeve, your parking pole and stuff like that. Some of this stuff's not actually going to be reused. And we're going to reuse our bolts, but this is the factory parking rod. This came out of the unit. If you're going to reuse your parking rod and it's a 2017 or older application or vehicle, check this area here at the base of the the actuator itself, because a lot of times this will start to mushroom and this end cap will separate from the rod, and then all this will basically fall off and you'll lose the ability to put the vehicle in park. So all my 6L80s and 6L90s, I update the parking rod to the heavy duty version. This is the part number for the 6L80, and they finally got the recipe right in 2018 to where the amount of parking rod failures had dropped to basically 0. Alright, as far as our pump, you always want to go through the pump. So we have a freshly milled and machined surface, and then in the Circle D kit it provides a whole bunch of Sonnax parts. So we have the high RPM slide spring. They're also including this is going to be the 6L80 LB1 boost valve kit along with their pressure regulator valve kit. So there's a couple things you have to do here, and I'll walk through that process when we get to it when it comes to installing the pressure regulator valve. Now, these are drop-in valves. The Sonnax does make oversized valve, I believe, available. I haven't ever had to use it. If the casting is so worn, or the stock pressure regulator valve, which is right here, if it looks kind of like a cam lobe coming out, I just simply replace the casting. I mean, they're pretty much everywhere, so no big deal. Alright, 3.5R drum. You always want to go back with it with reinforced welds here at the base to prevent any leakage. This drum didn't leak when I checked it, but I mean, it's only a matter of time. Eventually that drum will leak unless it's weld reinforced. Okay, speaking of the stator support, freshly machined as well. I have it separated from the stator so that we can replace the stator to stator support gasket, which comes in the paper and rubber kit, along with the intermediate O-ring here. Alright, other than that, you're going to replace everything as you normally would. If you're working with anything 2009 and back that has the first design stator sealing rings, they're the basically traditional interlock rings that are such that you can, rotate them in place in the groove there. You do not want to use that style of stator. You want to swap to a second design that uses the locking sealing rings with the support O-rings underneath. Okay, first design was prone to cross leaks, so you'd have issues with your 3.5R clutch either burning up or, in really, really bad cases, coming on when it shouldn't, because you had cross leaks between there and the 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch circuit. So the second design pretty much eliminated that issue. Okay, the Circle D kit also comes with what we refer to as an oversized pump thrust washer for the stator. So when you machine your stator and your bell slash pump body, you're basically removing 10/1000ths of an inch from each side or each casting. So you want to make up that difference with a 20 thou thick, oversized or over thick pump thrust washer. So here's the original one. I broke the tab when I tried to take it off, but as you can see, the Sonnax one, which is on the left, even by eye, is thicker. Okay, rotor and slide. They're not on the bench yet because I had to order them in. They'll be here tomorrow, but Transgo unbreakable pump rings, we're going to install those, and the rest of the pump kit comes in the main overhaul kit, which is in this big white bag. Okay, the 3.5R ply and balance pistons are aluminum. They'll go back in. They'll just get dressed with new seals. And then for your 1, 2, 3, 4, under no circumstances would I ever recommend you reuse the factory piston. I don't care what kind of shape it's in. This piston underwent numerous design changes over the years. I don't have the exact changeover years or whatever, but the earliest ones are the most prone to failure, but I don't trust any of them. Instead, I will install the Sonnax billet 1, 2, 3, 4 piston to basically eliminate the possibility of this thing cracking. I mean, that's the last thing you want. Alright, we also mentioned the billet 456 clutch hub and intermediate shaft. Okay, so that's this piece here on my right, and on my left is the factory 2-piece version. It's 2 pieces because technically it's welded up in here, and this likes to snap under high torque, high horsepower, high RPM applications where this one won't fail. Now there's 2 different versions of these hub shaft assemblies. There's this one here, which is our standard 36 tooth, meaning you have 36 lugs for the 36 tooth configuration for your 456 frictions. And then there is the 45 tooth power glide configuration that is used when power levels exceed like 700-800 horse. Beyond that, the only other difference between them is the aggregate apply surface area when you add up the entirety of all the different frictions. The 45 tooth power glide spec version has more surface area. I think it's like a 50% increase, whereas this will provide something like either a 25 or 30% increase when used with an extra friction and steel, which is what this kit provides in the 456 clutch. Alright, we also have Superior Technologies end play shims for the 456 hub. What this does is it allows you, and this is the part number, what this does is it allows you to control end play. The factory never made any selectives for front end play in these transmissions. They more or less set it at roughly 50,000 and out the door it went, or at least into the vehicle it went. Okay, unlike most other transmissions where they have selectives that allow you to dial in your end play to meet a specified clearance range, low end and a high end, these transmissions don't have that. However, it's been researched heavily by industry trade groups, builders, product developers, manufacturers, and determined that tighter end play, especially for performance applications, is more optimal. There's a Gears magazine article that I'll link in the description that actually talks about this in detail. And so, this way you have that information in context. All right, bushings. We always replace all the bushings in these transmissions, no different than any other. So the Circle D kit comes with a complete bushing kit for all of the components that actually take bushings. So that's your stator, your body, your 3.5R drum, your hubs, your center support, the output shaft slash ring gear basket, and the case. All right, planets was in good shape, sun gear in good shape, no change there. As far as the damper for your 456, I like the Sonnax hubs because they allow you to rerun the damper. Okay, there's some special things you got to do with it, or I should say specific things, not special. Specific things you have to do to prep this damper, and when we get to that point, we'll walk you through what that is and show it. But there are other products on the market, billet shaft hub combos, that do not allow you to run the factory damper. All right, let's go ahead and move on down the bench, and we'll get into the heart of the Circle D kit and kind of show you all the different clutch components and you know, clutch module, steel module, and such that come in this level 2 kit. Okay, when you open up the box, one of the first things you're going to see is the large black envelope. So this is going to contain all your paperwork, including some instructions and guidance, and it also contains a paid invoice, which I'm not going to pull out, as well as some kind of swag or, you know, paraphernalia. All right, so here's the level 2 kit. This is an overview of everything that comes in the kit, along with some other guidance for maintenance and sustainment. And it gets into the specifics, some technical information here, and so on and so forth. All right, I will try to PDF this kit and post it as well so that folks have it at the ready. I may check with Circle D first to make sure I'm okay to do that, but if I am, then I'll go ahead and do that. If they would have some kind of issue or concern about it, then I won't do it. So if you don't see it in there, it's because they have an issue, or, you know, they had some objections, and you know, ultimately I didn't end up posting it. All right, so now let's look at the meat of the kit. So they have everything nicely packaged. So here's going to be your 3.5R. So this is all your frictions and steels. And you'll notice they have an extra friction and steel with a pressure plate and a snap ring for you. Next is going to be your 1, 2, 3, 4 and your 4, 5, 6 kit. So these kits feature the Hyper Blue bonded balance pistons. So in the case of the 4, 5, 6, it would be your apply and balance piston. They also give you snap rings. So this is something that I don't want to say I don't see people do, or, you know, it's more of I don't know if people know about this, but you always want to replace your clutch return plate snap rings in the 3.5R drum, the 4.5/6. This is a spiral lock snap ring, and you know, that's going to be a little bit more advantageous and provide a little bit more security than the factory standard snap ring. So between that, the pistons, and then an additional snap ring for the 1, 2, 3, 4 and the 4.5/6 clutch, and their additional frictions and steel plate for the 4.5/6 gives you plenty of holding power for performance applications. So these frictions are Borg-Warner, so Borg-Warner high energy here. You can, if you want to, further opt for something else like Raybestos Stage 1. I actually thought about doing this, but in a couple conversations with them and a few others, it was determined that between the enhanced lubrication that the hub gives you from Sonnax, combined with the extra clutch, for applications, you know, in the neighborhood that we're going to be working with, that 600, 650 area, is determined not to be necessary. Okay, lastly, you have your 2.6 clutch and your low reverse clutch kits. So again, 2 Hyper Blue apply pistons, frictions and steels, and snap ring for the 2.6. So pretty comprehensive kit. We also have all of our snap rings that originally came in the transmission, so for whatever reason clearances are not where they need to be, we have some ability to make adjustments. All right, the other thing that I always like to do with most of my transmissions, if not all of them anymore, is replace the sprag clutch. So this is going to be our one-way sprag assembly. This is a 38 element design. And when you're holding the inner portion here, the inner race, the outer race will turn counterclockwise and lock clockwise. Okay. I guess you can take this thing apart and rebuild it, but I've never done it, so I couldn't tell you. We have the old sprag back there along with on the back wall. Let me kind of adjust the camera angle so you can see it, or see them rather. We have all the old steels, bonded apply and balance pistons, and then I don't know if it's visible at the moment, but we also have all the old clutches, you know, the frictions. Here's my advice to you, especially if you're new to these transmissions or similar, and that is always retain and keep aside your original steels, clutches, even your bonded pistons, sprag, and anything else that comes out of the unit that isn't just simply straight up destroyed. And the reason I say that, especially if you're building more or less a stock level, you know, stock 6L80 or 6R80 or whatever it is you're building, the reason I say that is so that you have those parts for reference. I can't tell you how many times I'm stacking up a clutch and I go to measure my clearance, or even just by eye I see that something is way off. And you know, I always have all the old components so that I can quickly compare and see, you know, what's the difference and or what's going on. And usually it's my error, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes something materially changed. In fact, one case, I had a bonded piston that was actually out of spec, and it was, I want to say like 40 or 50 thousandths taller than it should have been, and I knew that because I compared it to the pre-existing one. So always have that stuff handy just in case you need it. You're not going to reuse steels, you're not going to reuse frictions, you're not going to reuse bonded pistons, but they are there for reference if you need them. Alright, as far as the back half of the case is concerned, the rear gear set, I'm going to just basically put this in a big bucket of Deck 6 before it's installed. There's not really a whole lot you need to do until you get to about maybe 850, 900 horse, and then you want to upgrade this thing to one that has a billet drive plate. But it's usually not necessary until you get to, you know, that kind of power output. Alright, case itself is, well, it's a transmission case, unremarkable. It's been cleaned up. I may do a little bit more cleaning, and, you know, just to get it spick and span. Okay, here is the brand new Tecum. This is from General Motors. So this is the part number for it. Okay, I will tell you this, these part numbers are largely meaningless when it comes to you know, the new stuff, because whether you buy it from GM or whether you buy it from Sonnax, you have to have it programmed or program it yourself, and you can do that if you purchase a subscription to AC Delco's Technical Delivery Service, or TDS. You can program any Tecum to any vehicle and application. You just have to, you know, punch in the information and, you know, make sure that you have a laptop with the correct interface cable. But beyond that, I recommend you replace these things, because just like anything else, Tecums can wear out. And if you have a Tecum that has 120, 150, 200,000 miles on it, the probability that it's going to fail at some point in the foreseeable future is much, much greater than a brand new Tecum, especially if it was remanufactured by a reputable aftermarket company or brand new from GM, which is what I default to. Alright, same deal with the internal mode switch, brand new, and the speed sensor on harness assembly. Alright, this part number 242844706, this is for 2011 and back 6L80s. In 2012, they went to a unigear design in these transmissions, and that necessitated a change to the rear speed sensor that ultimately, you know, changed the, I guess, the distance or the depth dimensionally with the speed sensor to coincide with the change in the output shaft and ring gear basket. So as you can see, this has your separate ring gears and a spacer and 2 snap rings. In 2012, they went away from that design and they moved to a, you know, one unified gear, and that's how, you know, it went. Okay, here's your filter. So this is AC Delco. I mean, you can buy aftermarket filters. I've used aftermarket filters all the time, no issue. You have a brand new reusable gasket, so bonded steel, steel inserts here and rubber with steel bolt stops. All right. Lastly, for the valve body, Circle D will provide you a spacer plate as well as an in-plug kit with O-rings from Sonnax. So it's basically a zip kit included with the broader Circle D kit, and that should shore up your hydraulics when paired with the other things they give you, like the boost and pressure regulator valves. So when you purchase these kits from Circle D, you're going to have to give them the VIN number and a couple other pieces of information about the vehicle so that they can provide to you things like the correct spacer plate for the year, vintage, and submodel application and so forth. So just be aware of that. The total cost of this kit was, I think, a little over $1,500 plus shipping. I don't remember what shipping was, but as far as value for the dollar versus you having to piece all this stuff together yourself, it's actually a really, really good value. So I haven't used these kits too often, but I'm starting to gravitate toward them because it just makes sense versus me trying to piece everything together. If I'm doing a non-stock application, I can just pick whatever level that best fits what I'm trying to do and run with it. So level 2, anything up to about 700 horse. I mean, I think they have different ratings. They have a level 2.5 kit as well. And then a level 3 and a level 4 are things like, up to 850 and up to, I want to say, 1,000 or 1,200 horse. You have to check the website. I'm not exactly sure, but they have 4 distinct levels of these kits for these transmissions. All right, let me go ahead and get the bench reorganized, and then we'll start building up the pump. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to then put together all of the drums, so the 3.5R, the 4.5.6, and the center support. And then once I have the drums with the pistons and everything installed, then I'll go ahead and one by one start installing clutch packs. So I'm not going to film the bushing portion of this video or this rebuild because frankly I just don't have the time. In the future, if I have one that comes in and I have a little more time with it, I'll go ahead and do a bushing video. But bushings are largely the same for any transmission. You yank them out using pullers, bushing drivers, or whatever you have available, and install them with the appropriate size bushing drivers. That's basically it. All right, guys, let me clear off all this mess, and then we'll get started. We're going to start the build up with the stator support assembly. So we have everything here that we need to go ahead and do that. So we have our stator itself with brand new bushings installed. We have the stator support with all of the circuits labeled, as well as the modification we need to make to this thing to facilitate installation of the Sonnax pressure regulator valve. So here's our stock valve train, the stock spring, the stock bumper spring for the boost valve, stock boost valve and sleeve, and of course our retaining pin. So we're going to replace everything over here with what you see in these 2 packets. So you have the pressure regulator valve and main spring. This will be reinstalled, and then you have a boost valve. Now it also comes with a spring, so these are the same spring. You're obviously not going to install both of them. Okay, and then over here you have your torque converter limit valve, your pressure relief ball and spring, and your torque converter clutch control valve or apply valve. You also have 2 sets of sealing rings and support O-rings. Okay, so this is the set we're going to install. These are the locking style sealing rings. They go over top the support O-rings in the 3 grooves here. And as you can see, each of these grooves have 2 sets of notches cut in them so that you can install the 2 respective locking tabs in each sealing ring. This set of sealing rings is for your first design stator. So 2006 through I think 2009, this is what you had. You never ever want to install first design stator if you're overhauling the transmission. You always retro a second design stator with the locking style sealing rings onto whatever pump cover or stator support. Okay, this, to my knowledge, never changed. So the only changes that took place occurred to the stator for the sealing rings, sealing ring grooves. All right, now this is the Sonnax oversized thrust washer. It's 20 thousandths of an inch thicker than the factory washer. So that'll go on once we're all done. And then as far as the modification we need to make, so you'll notice in this packet there is a 39 thousandths drill bit and 2 check balls. Okay, what you're going to do is you're going to place a check ball in this orifice here. This is the PR balance orifice plug, and you're going to stake that check ball in place with a drift punch. Then you're going to take that 39 thousandths drill bit, chuck it up in a drill, and drill a hole right through this passage here, starting at roughly the top, this countersunk radius at a 45-degree angle into this void right here. All right, so why are you doing that? Well, if you notice the design of the pressure regulator valve from Sonnax compared to the factory valve, you'll see a marked difference in the balance end. Sonnax reinforced the balance end by lengthening the spool by nearly 4-fold over the factory design. Now, what this does is it effectively blocks off that balance feed oil. So you'd have no balance oil to this part of the valve. So what you need to do is drill that hole to reintroduce a balance feed circuit to work with this valve. Okay, the stock PR valves are notorious for wear, especially here at the inboard spool. That's the most common problem that we see, but oftentimes, especially in a very high mileage or hard use, high performance type application, you'll see wear here and here. And if the wear is so bad that it looks like a cam lobe, it's just completely oblong shaped or something, it's best to just ream this passage or find another stator that where you have the valve in it to inspect, where the valve doesn't look like that. It looks more like this. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to move this to another bench. We'll go ahead and install the check ball, and then we'll drill out the balance orifice through the casting so that we can complete that modification. All right, a couple things before you get started. Number one, Sonnax will give you 2 of these check balls. Okay, one they just consider extra, so you can set it aside or put it in your spare parts bin. Secondly, you're going to need to find a drill that's capable of actually grabbing and holding and securing a 39 thousandths drill bit. You can get a chuck extender or adapter, and that'll work as well. Third, to recommend you countersink, so I've put 2 countersinks right here where this red marker indicates, and that should help facilitate getting the getting the hole started. So you're going to put it right down in there, put the check ball right down in there, and then you're going to gently tap it and seat it in place. So it doesn't take much. Okay. Give it a couple more whacks. Alright, that should do it. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and drill. So do the best you can. Go to start with a relatively slow speed, and then kind of move up to kind of a slow to medium or moderate speed. Whatever you do, do not force or try to press too much pressure on the drill bit. It will break. I know it's going to be really difficult to see, but basically the hole went through this passage here and into this cavity, and that's exactly what you want. So 39 thousandths. What I'm going to do is I'm going to blow this all out with shop air, and then we'll go back to the bench and continue to with the assembly. All right, let's go ahead and put the pump cover together. So we have our boost valve. And that's just an extra spring at this point. So there's the boost valve hiding in there. So we're just going to take these components and set them to the side. We don't need them. The only thing we're reusing is the bumper spring. Alright, so go ahead and just simply insert your valve with the balance spool end in first. Make sure it goes down nice and easy. Then your springs. Okay, make sure the bumper spring is settled over the stem of the valve. And then lastly, your boost. Yeah, here's your roll pin location right here. It's going to engage right here. Okay, just like that. And I apologize, on the Sonnax valve is actually going to be the inboard land. So a better reference point might be the face or the end of the sleeve relative to the bore and the top of the bore. It's about 3/16 of an inch deep. Okay, just check for freedom of movement. Okay, feels good. So now we'll go ahead and install our pressure relief ball and spring. I like to do that first, get it out of the way. It's kind of a pain. I'm gonna try to do it here, but if not, we'll have to chuck this up into a vise so that I have a little bit, more control. Make it a little bit easier. So let's see how we do. This spring is under a fair amount of tension, so don't be surprised if I struggle with it. All right, got it in. So I think it'd be difficult. Like I said, it's probably best to just do it on the vise, or some other retaining fixture. and then countersink it. Just make sure it's below flush. Alright, so now we'll do our TCC limit. So valve in first. Okay, just doesn't go, just gently persuade it. It should not drag, just like any other valve. You don't want to have drag on the valve. And then install your Y-shaped retainer with the wide side facing inboard toward the working surface. Again, this is another example of a spring that will fight you. Not as bad as the pressure relief ball spring, but it's still pretty stout. And then last but not least, our torque converter clutch control valve or apply valve. Got to add WD to the bore. Let me do that. Now Sonnax tells you to test all these valves dry, and that's true of like every valve train and anything that takes valve trains, but I found that using WD-40 is valid to the extent that it's not going to skew your results. So again, the wide side of the Y faces the working surface. It looks like none of these springs will let me install the retainer by hand, you know, without using a screwdriver or some other tool to get them to stay put, collapsed in behind the spring. So just double check everything, make sure it's good. Okay, we'll install a new pickup seal once we validated that everything's good to go here and we've installed our stator. Like the pickup seal is literally the last thing that I'm going to do. Okay, let's move to the vac test machine and we'll go ahead and perform our vacuum testing on the stator. Alright, we're here at the vac test station, so the first thing we want to do is calibrate the machine. You always want to do that before every use. So how you do that is you take your test hose or lead and you plug it into the calibration receptacle. Then you turn the machine on and you want to see a steady 5 inches of lift here on the gauge. Now, once you see that, you're going to come over here and you're going to plug the calibration port with a finger or thumb. And then you'll see the needle jump up to 25 inches, or at least that's where you want it. It may jump up to somewhere between 15 and 30. So you have two valves, a pump valve and a bleeder valve. Your pump valve is going to be what you use to dial in your 5 inches. That's going to be your base calibration level of vacuum. Once you have 5 inches dialed in, you go ahead and plug the calibration port, and then wherever it ends up, you're going to use your bleeder valve to adjust it so it reads 25 inches. Once you take your finger way off the calibration port, it should drop right back to 5 inches and stay there. Alright, so it looks like we're about 7 inches. I used this machine yesterday. That's why I always say calibrate it before every use, because it was perfectly fine when I used it yesterday, but they can drift on you. Okay, so now we're at 5 inches. We'll plug the calibration port, and we're a little bit high, so adjust. So for adjustments, clockwise on the pump valve reduces vacuum, counterclockwise increases it. Here it's the exact opposite with the bleeder valve. Okay, 25. Back to 5. At 25. And 5. Alright, so now the machine is ready to use. So I confess, in the previous segment I completely spaced on the fact that when you test these things, you cannot actually use the TCC limit valve itself to test that bore. You have to use an extra actuator feed limit valve. So what we're going to do is I'll test that bore first. It's going to be right here, and what you need to do is you need to insert this valve such that it seals off this circuit. It doesn't want to go in there. Alright, so now we want to make sure that it seals off this circuit entirely. And then for your pressure regulator valve, if you're testing the stock valve, you need to install a little nut that Sonnax provides in their zip kit and hold the valve inboard. With the Sonnax valve, that's not applicable. You just test it here. For your TCC control valve, you're going to test that here, and you're going to plug this little port right here. And the boost valve, you're going to test right here. There's nothing you need to do in particular other than just put the test block and gasket over it to test it. Alright, so we'll start with the TCC limit. Let's get our block set up. And then you may want to have a pair of needle nose pliers on the stem of the TCC limit valve, just in case, because when you introduce vacuum, it might suck it inboard and you might lose your vacuum signal, or you might lose the seal. So it wants to suck it inboard. I could feel it, and it looks like it's holding about 23 inches. So as soon as you let it go, you lose your vacuum. Okay, we'll test the PR valve. And the balance spool end, that's sealing 24 inches, a little over 24 inches. And when you test here, this little orifice you created, it's going to allow vacuum to escape. So I don't really test it once I have the Sonnax valve in, or at least it's not something I'm concerned about. So I got my boost. Alright, boost is giving me 24. So good sealing integrity. And then my TCC applied. So again, no vacuum. Plug the port. You're at 23 and a quarter. Alright, so this pump cover is good to go in all respects, and now we can proceed to mating it with the stator. We'll install that gasket and then basically finish up the stator support assembly. Okay, to mate the stator with the stator support, you're going to need a couple things. So one, you're going to want to grab your inboard O-ring that goes right here on the stator. That's this black O-ring right here. Then your stator support gasket. So there's 6 8mm headed bolts. I want to say they're 6 millimeters wide, and the ATSG manual doesn't have a torque spec, but I typically use 97 inch-pounds, so there's 6 of them. So they will be needed once you finish pressing on stator and stator support together. Alright, let me grab up razor. So this packet contains your slide O-ring support, and then your Teflon slide spring and slide spring support. And then you have your torque converter clutch seal for the input shaft, and then your O-ring. Just to prevent mishaps, I'll actually just lightly lube the whole stator shaft, so I can just slide the O-ring right over top. And then I'm going to wipe it off. The lube can stay on the O-ring itself, but I don't want any lube anywhere else. So you can lightly dab the O-ring, but try to keep assembly lube off of any other surface. So then, once you have it lined up, just stick it on the stator. Alright, then all you're going to do is go ahead and mate the two. Just line everything up. You can get it about 80% the way in by hand. And then go ahead, thread your bolts. Whatever you do, do not cinch them down, just get them started. Kind of leave them like this. You know, a few turns is all you need. We got one more. And now it's off to the press. All right, everything's situated in the press, so just make sure you're centered and press it home. All right, you don't need to get crazy, just press it down until it comes to a stop. All right, you can use any press tooling to do this as long as it's suitable. So just to let you know what I'm using, I got this Kenmore J8092. Get that in focus. J8092, that's the shaft, and then the press tool itself, the driver, is J37262. Can get that in focus for you. All right, back to the bench. All right, now it's time to go ahead and install our stator to stator support bolts. And this is going to appear out of sequence from a continuity perspective. And the reason for that is that I initially filmed a different torquing procedure with these 6 bolts that hold the stator to the stator support. And then I came across a Gears magazine article that outlined their procedure, which I feel is actually going to be more beneficial. So this was after the pump was completely assembled, and I was reviewing footage and researching something else, and that's when I came across it. So I will link the entire article in the description of the video, but this is the procedure itself. And so what they recommend is a 3-step torquing process and the use of a medium strength thread locker. I'm going to just use blue Loctite to attach the stator to the stator support. So in the following sequence, you're going to see the same assembly, but it's not going to have any of the sealing rings and support O-rings or thrust washer installed. So I wanted to make sure I explained that continuity error, and at the same token, show you what I feel is the better process, the process that I'm going to be following going forward. So what they have you do is install thread locker to all 6 of these bolts, and then torque them to 60 inch-pounds. Then torque them to 80 inch-pounds, and then finish up with 120 inch-pounds, and then check them like an hour later to make sure that, you know, it's still holding 120 inch-pounds of torque. And the reason for that is the compression of the gasket. They want to ensure that this gasket is fully compressed and is sealing to the tune of 100% between stator support, because if you know anything about these transmissions at all, this is a problem area, or can be a source of problems, including cross leaks, failure to fully seal apply circuits, compensator feed, and other issues. So this is a new gasket. Obviously we want to make sure that it is fully compressed. So first thing they have you do is apply the thread locker. Now what I recommend you do is take a bolt and make sure that you can thread it in and that it goes in every single hole. Okay, just run it down a few threads, make sure it's not binding up, make sure it doesn't become difficult, assuming you don't cross thread it. Okay, this one is giving me a little bit of trouble. Okay, I'm not sure why it's not going in by hand, but as long as you can run it down with a low power impact without resistance, you should be fine. Okay, so I'm satisfied we're good there. Now we're going to go ahead and apply our Loctite. This is actually Permatex, but glue is considered medium strength. You don't need to use a ton of it, but at the same token, you want to make sure your threads are adequately coated. Following this procedure, it's very, very, very unlikely that you're going to have an issue with these bolts backing out on you. So set it to 60 inch-pounds initially, and we're going to start here and finish up there. You can go in a crisscross pattern, or you can just go around sequentially. It doesn't really matter, to be honest. Okay, now we're gonna increase it to 80 inch-pounds and execute our second round. Okay, now we're going to go to our final torque of 120 inch-pounds. All right, per the procedure, I'm gonna wait an hour and then we're gonna come back and check it and make sure that it's still holding, you know, every bolt's still holding 120 inch-pounds of torque. And if they're not, we're just gonna retorque them right then and there, and then that'll be it. All right, let's go ahead and check our torque. So start here, work our way around, see if we're still at 120. Okay, that one moved a hair. Okay. All right, I'm satisfied that this was executed correctly and properly, and that we will have perfect sealing integrity at this location where the stator and stator support meet, and that this gasket will do its job. So, like I said, I know it's a continuity error in the video, but I wanted to make sure I showed you the correct procedure, at least in my mind, the most optimal procedure for this part of the assembly process, so that you can apply it going forward, just like I will be. All right, let's move on. I'm satisfied we got them all. So now what we're going to do is install that washer. Actually, I'm sorry, we're not going to do that. I lied. I'm going to actually change out the pickup seal with the new one. So I'm going to go to the shop vise. I'm going to chuck this up in it, and I'll go ahead and deal with that. All right, taking these out is very straightforward. So just use whatever flat blade screwdriver. The only thing I would recommend is make sure it's smooth, no grooves in it, because you don't want to cut the face of the stator here. All right, take a rag, wipe it down. So it has kind of remnants of nasty fluid in there. You want to get all that out. Just double check. Make sure you got everything. Yes, I know this rag is dirty itself, but not gonna hurt anything. All right, situate your seal. You know, get it kind of started, and then use whatever appropriate size bushing driver you have handy. All right, you'll know once you hit the deck, the report or the sound of the hammer will change to a much flatter tone, so you know it's in there and it's good. All right, now we're ready to dress the stator with the new sealing rings, support O-rings. So you have your 3 support O-rings here, and then you have your 3 locking style sealing rings. So the earlier units that had the traditional style non-locking sealing rings, there was a lot of complaints about what do you call it? Either bind ups and or cross leaking, slipping, and flare shifting. So the reason for that is you had the cross leakage between the 1, 2, 3, 4 and 3, 5R clutch circuits, and you were able to diagnose this by dropping the pan and control body assembly and air testing those circuits. So they're going to be right here, and what that would allow you to do is you test the 1, 2, 3, 4 and watch air and or fluid coming out of the 3, 5R. And if you had a whole bunch of air and fluid coming out, and this is when the transmission's in the vehicle and you're trying to diagnose this condition, then you know that you have cross leakage in that area. So GM wisely decided to modify the design such that it no longer had that issue. They went to this locking style ceiling ring setup with the support O-rings, and the support O-rings act as kind of like an outward, repulsive force on the ceiling rings, basically forcing them against the inner diameter of the drum. All right, that's just going to live in there, I guess. So basically, you had a much, much better seal at the junction of those two circuits. So that was much needed, and it made a big difference when it came to, the amount of warranty claims the GM saw with these things. So the only thing you want to really keep mindful of here when you're installing these O-rings is just you don't want to cut them on the notches. That's basically what you're trying to avoid. So that's why I put a little assembly lube on the stator itself, just to kind of facilitate the ease of movement for these support O-rings. Now your ceiling rings. So what you're going to do is you're going to line up the locking tabs on each ceiling ring with the cutouts on the stator, and you want to install them with the tabs facing skyward. So it's always a little tricky to get that first one in because you got to negotiate 2 other lands or 2 other grooves to get it home, but as long as you're careful, you'll be all right. If something happens and you got to readjust, you got to take it off, then do so. You don't want to rush anything. So it looks like this rotated on me, so I got to get it back to alignment. So that's how you want it to look on the interlock side. And then it should look just like this on the locking tab side. So again, pretty straightforward deal. These particular ceiling rings, for this transmission are not fussy, 6L80s, 6L90s, 45s, 50s. Some of these ceiling rings are similar like kind for other units, are a little different. They can be very tricky, and if you're not careful, you can break them. So you obviously want to avoid that if at all possible. It's the first time doing this. It might be a good idea to have extra supplies on hand, extra parts like ceiling rings, especially if they are, somewhat breakable, or there's some risk that you may break them. It's a good idea. Same with the turbine shaft ceiling rings. It's a good idea to have some extras just in case you break one as you're installing, expanding and resizing them. These transmissions, not so much of concern. I will say that the Ford 6R80s, the Ford counterpart to these units, that's a little bit more of an issue. So, I've broken ceiling rings before on those transmissions, just not being careful. And I have the sizing tools, but what you need to do is you need to keep the sizing tool in place for a period of time so that the ceiling rings can form to that sizing tool's inner diameter. If you don't have the tools and you're trying to get by, using improvisational methods, your stator can become your sizer for your turbine shaft ceiling ring. So, a tip that I read that Jake at Jake's Performance had once given about those one-piece, sizable ceiling rings is that he uses electrical tape to size them, or he had talked about using electrical tape to size them initially. And then you leave the electrical tape in place for a period of time, and then you carefully remove it, and you would then install whatever workpiece goes over those ceiling rings, a pump stator or some other shaft or whatever. I think he was talking about 4L80Es, but presumably the same would apply for any transmission where you have Teflon sealing rings. Alright, so we have our stator support all assembled, modified per the instructions from Sonnax to facilitate installation of the Sonnax pressure regulator valve. So I'm happy with this. Now it's time to move on to the other half of the pump, which is the body/bell housing. So we'll drag that over here and we'll get that going. Alright, now we're ready to go ahead and assemble the pump body, but before we do that, you want to do one thing first, and that is check your clearance between your working surface or deck surface, so the pump body, and the top of your slide and your rotor. Ideally, you want to be between 1 and 2 thousandths clearance with the slide and 1.5 thousandths clearance the rotor to the deck surface. So you can do this a couple different ways. You can use micrometers, which is going to be the more precise method, but also the more time consuming. You could also use a straight edge and feeler gauges. Now if you're going to use a straight edge and feeler gauges, I would strongly recommend you use a precision ground straight edge, something purpose built for taking these kinds of measurements. So we have a 1 thou and a 2 thou feeler gauge set here. Or I should say 1 thou and 2 thou gauge is the whole set. Alright, so first I'm going to check the 1 thou gauge and just want to verify that we can slide that underneath. Okay, and you can move the rotor and the slide about to make sure that you're not actually coming into contact with the straight edge. You don't want to be moving that. That would tell me that you have negative clearance. Okay, that means that this is proud a little bit relative to this surface. So if you get a new pump in or a pump back from the machine shop, this is definitely the first thing you want to test. I've never had my machinist mill one of these such that it's out of clearance, but I've heard accounts of folks buying, you know, pump bodies that have been reconditioned and not being within spec. Either the pocket was too deep relative to the deck, or the pocket was too shallow relative to the deck. Okay, so that's 1 thou, and you want to measure it across different spots. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on this. I already did this, you know, independent of the video, but you want to make sure that you're measuring in multiple areas. You know, you can go here, here, and then crossways like this, or, you know, make an asterisk. I mean, however you want to do it. Point is, you want to make sure that your readings are consistent. Okay, so this is dragging. So the 2 thou clearance is what you want for your slide. I mean, if your rotor is also 2 thousandths clearance, that's not the end of the world. You just don't want to be more than that. Okay, that's dragging, so I'm pretty confident that this pump is in spec just based on what I did there, but as I mentioned, I already did this off camera more extensively, and you know, this rotor slide combination with this particular body, or bell housing if you will, is in good shape. Alright, these out of the way. So I installed a new Durabond bushing. Always install a new pump bushing for the body as well as the stator. Even if you, for whatever reason, don't want to install any other bushings, these two bushings in the stator and the body bushing wear aggressively. But I mean, I replace all the bushings in these transmissions just as a matter of course. All right, we have transgo and breakable pump rings. So with this kit, it does come with its own priming spring. Sorry, not prepared. Did not have my straight razor handy. So here are the instructions. So what they're telling you here with this, you know, the break in the flats for your vanes. If you're not installing new vanes, you want to look for wear patterns to indicate which side of the pump vane faced the slide and which side faced inboard. And they're telling you to look for the wear pattern that indicates where the break-in flats were visually, because that tells you they were toward the pump rings. I'll make sure I'm in the shot here. Okay, so these will have some packing grease on them, so we're gonna have to clean these off before we install them. Unfortunately, it's, you know, kind of a necessary evil when building transmissions. All your kit and parts that are ferrous metal are gonna have packing grease so that they don't rust in storage. Like that looks like rust, but it's not, it's packing grease. So these vanes will have to be completely cleaned off as well. So we have our slide support and our support O-ring, our rotor guide, which is new. And then here are our slide or priming spring and rear Teflon spring support. Here is your pivot pin spring. And this is going to be your alignment dowel. Alright, let's see what else we have. We're going to run the Sonnax priming spring. That is what the Circle D kit came with, so that's what I want to use. And then you have your perimeter O-ring. So that goes around here, all around the perimeter. And then, of course, you have your pump half bolts. So, bell pump body to stator support. All right, let me clean these parts up, and then what we'll do is we'll first start with the seal. We'll install the new seal along with the snap ring on the other side of the bell, and then at that point we'll be ready to build up the pump body and then marry it to the stator. Alright, so when it comes to installing this seal, ideally you want a seal driver that is made for it, like what I have here. So it's got like a beveled face that fits perfectly with the shape of the contour of the outer face of the seal. And so you want to position your seal. Try to get it as square as you can in the bore. I mean, this really isn't rocket science. I'm probably making it a lot more complicated than it really is. The main thing I stress the importance of a proper driver is just due to the shape of the seal. Okay. Again, if you build a lot of these, it makes good sense to invest in the right driver. If you're only building them occasionally, or very rarely, like you're a DIY or just, you know, building your own, you know, maybe you don't invest the money, maybe you find a shop that can R&R the bushing and the seal for you. But it doesn't make sense not to have it if you do these in any kind of volume at all. Alright, so bushing and seal are installed. So you want to lube your bushing and seal up so that they are good to go when it comes to you know, first startup. There's just a whole boatload of assembly lube up in there. And then you can lube the pocket as well. So now we'll go back to the bench and put the rest of the pump together. One thing I did forget to mention when we were over there is these seals here. These are for your cooler line. grab a pry bar and we can take them out. So you got a little bit of residual crap on crud in there. So I'm going to clean that out as well. Okay, so now we're ready to go ahead and put the pump body in. I installed the new cooler line fitting seals. So first thing you want to do is install your slide. So grab your slide support O-ring and the support itself. And then what I'll do is I'll literally take the entire body, invert it, and then install the slide underneath. And then from there, I'll just go ahead and grab it underneath like this and flip it over. Okay. Hands will get a little dirty. You may have to refresh the assembly lube if you had installed it in the prior step like I have, or applied it I should say. Installed it, yeah, you install assembly lube. So now that we have that in there, our next step is to install our 2 Teflon slide springs. And get those in there. And then your pivot pin and spring. Make sure it's fully seated and bottomed out. Alright, go ahead and install a pump vane. A pump ring. I am all over the place today. All over the place. Pump ring, pump vane, slide spring, bell housing. Alright. Alright, now we have our new rotor guide. And no, I have not had anything to drink today. Just real clumsy from a verbal perspective. Okay. So now we're going to go ahead and install our 13 vanes. I would not recommend you ever reuse vanes, although, I guess it's a common practice, in our trade to reuse these, but I don't ever do it. Vanes are not that expensive. I think they were like 25 bucks for a set of vanes, and then another, $5 or $6 for the rotor guide. It's worth doing if you're, refreshing the pump or, machining it, taking the time and investing the money. It just makes sense to, spend a little extra money on your vanes. You'll hit a point where it'll be kind of tricky to install the next vane like you saw there, but that's, you know, that's normal. What you have to do is move the underlying ring so that it's offset as far in that direction as possible if you're trying to install your you know, that 7th or 8th vane. Okay. Now we're ready to install our priming spring, our slide spring. So just seat it. I like to come about roughly halfway up here so that you have roughly half the coil visible above the spring seat location on the slide. And then you just got to come with a screwdriver. And you gotta have to be quick and aggressive with it. Otherwise, you know, you'll have to do it twice, I guess. Alright, check this here if this is kind of proud a little bit. Let's tap it back in. Alright, this other spring that came in the kit is actually for your pressure relief ball, so I'm going to swap the factory ball, or ball and spring rather, with this one, and the ball will stay there, but the spring will be replaced with this Transgo spring. So I'm going to do that off camera because that's kind of a pain in the ass. And then once I'm done with that, we'll go ahead and marry these two parts together, the stator support and pump body. And as I was mentioning earlier, there is a torque sequence that you have to follow with all of these different bolts over here. So we'll go through that and get this pump together so that we can, at this point, move on to the drums. Okay, one thing I wanted to point out with the pressure relief spring that the Transgo kit comes with is that it's wider on one side. All right, see, the diameter is noticeably wider than the factory springs. So Transgo spring, factory spring. Okay, the other side is just like the factory spring. So what Transgo advises is you put the wide end inboard toward the ball, and you put the, I guess, factory diameter end toward the retaining pin. I'm not sure why they don't put that in their instructions. It probably doesn't matter, to be honest, but when I called them about it once, that's what I was told. So just wanted to throw that in there because I recalled that as I was taking the spring out. Alright, now we're ready to marry the stator support and pump body / bell housing. So a couple things real quick. First thing is we need to put our alignment dowel pin back into its location here on the stator support. Okay, get that in there. Then we'll go ahead and lube up the working surfaces. Alright, so this is the 12 o'clock position on the bell housing. There's, you know, one bolt at the 12 o'clock location, and then this is your 6 o'clock. So you're just going to take your stator support assembly with all your feed passages and carefully lower it into place. Alright, the next thing you need to do is align the halves. There's a few different avenues of approach that you can take when it comes to doing this. If you build a lot of these, you're just going to want to use an alignment tool. Okay, it makes it easy, quick work of everything, and you know, it's no muss, no fuss. So this is Kenmore J46664. That's 46664. And all you're going to do is carefully position it into position. Until it seats. It can be tricky to install, and well, the reason for that is because it perfectly aligns the two halves. So it is a finely machined piece of tooling. So I'll rotate it just a little bit so I can get a little bit better access to that bolt, and it aligns the pump perfectly every single time. All right, I have all my pump bolts in the sequence that they need to be tightened and torqued in, numbered. Now before we get any further, if you do not have this tool, you can take one of a couple of different other alternative approaches. One, you can buy a tool in the aftermarkets that's just like this Ken Moore tool. I think Adaptacase makes one. You can use a very large hose clamp. That's also perfectly fine. The other option for you, if you don't have either access to either of those tools, can't get them, maybe they're on back order or not available, or you just don't want to spend the money, and you don't trust a hose clamp, you can get 2 alignment bolts from a Saturn TAAT transmission. There's 4 bolts that align the valve body assembly to the case on those units, and those bolts are designed in such a way that when you use them on this thing, it will align the pump stator support stator assembly to the body perfectly. And where you would thread them in is in these 2 positions right here. Okay, this is the number 11 and this is the number 5 hole. So this is number 11 in the sequence, number 5 in the sequence. So that will allow you to align the stator and the stator support and bell/body essentially perfectly. Okay, you have 13 of these bolts. They're all the same length. 8mm socket is required. Just want to install them. And I'll be honest, I haven't yet memorized this tightening sequence, so that's every single one of these I do. I just take, I don't know, a minute, 30 seconds to a minute, and I write the numbers down on every single ball location. Eventually I'll get to the point where I don't need to do that anymore. You do enough of anything, I mean, you know, you'll kind of, it'll become second nature for you, but admittedly I'm not there yet with this thing. Okay, go in 2 or 3 threads, just make sure that nothing's binding up, nothing feels weird or whatever. And then you can zip them down with a low power impact. You don't want to use a 3/8 or 1/2 inch, obviously. I mean, you know, common sense tells you that's dangerous and risky. But this is a 3/8, but it's very low power. Okay, 97 inch-pounds, just like it says here on the pump cover. So all bolts, 97 inch-pounds. So we'll start with our number 1. Once we have our torque wrench set to the correct setting, number 6. That's number 8. 12 and 13. So I'm just going around checking them, make sure that I didn't miss any, make sure that they're all torqued to spec. Sometimes they'll give a little bit and they'll take a little bit more torque. Not often, but again, it doesn't hurt to double check. All right, looks like we're good there. Okay, now it's time to move on to the drums and the rest of the sub-assemblies.